Oh my goodness. I asked and you guys received. I said it in my video. If you guys, thumb up a comment 50 times or more, I will cover the Stormblade. And I kind of got faked out because I checked this video for like the first hour or two, and the top comment was at 16 likes. And I thought, yeah, that's what I thought. I knew this weapon was overblown, but, well, it came back with a blade. This Storm did. Okay, that was terrible. But the comment definitely got more than 50 likes, and here we are talking about the Stormblade. So why are we talking about this sword? That kind of crappy base game sword that nobody ever thinks about? Well, I can't speak to its normal damage. I'm not 100% certain how this stacks up against the other swords. It has a pretty good base damage of about 28,000 with the loadout that I'm using, and it has a really good DPS, but the main thing that everybody is interested in when it comes to the Stormblade is the crit hits cause an explosion. So that's a new perk that's come on a lot of melees. I'm not 100% certain about a complete list. I did ask about this in a recent video where people in my comments listed a bunch of weapons, and I think there was a missing one, but I'll show the comment I pinned where I believe there was one more weapon that I'm missing that was supposed to be on that list. But suffice it to say, if I am not mistaken, this is the only sword in the entire game that has this 6 perk. And that's interesting because swords are pretty typically the best melees in the entire game. They generally just have a higher swing speed and a good damage and a good mix of everything you want from a melee that keeps you mobile and effective in game. Not to mention Paleoluna exists, so any melee with a high swing speed instantly becomes the best melee in the game. Now, the Stormblade with an attack speed perk actually has a 0.4 second attack speed, which is on par with the Storm King's Ravager and slightly slower than the Spectral Blade, but the Spectral Blade has a fast swing speed anyway, so it's not really a big deal. It performs on par with the other two while having the crit hit. So throughout the gameplay, you've probably noticed that enemies are exploding every time I land a crit, and that makes this weapon kind of tricky because I'm not 100% certain what the actual best perks are because it depends on what you're going for. I think if you're going to use the Stormblade, you gotta run it with the crit hits because there is, like I mentioned, the Ravager, the Spectral Blade. There's already the Stab's Worth the Third if you're trying to swing fast. If you're actually going to make a go of using the Stormblade, you want to use this weapon for what it's known for, and that is definitely those crit hits. And honestly, even if it's not the highest damage output on a single target, it is really, really useful in a crowd of enemies because whenever you're swinging at one enemy, it can just instantly explode and blow up all the other enemies around it, and that is a little bit tougher to calculate because it's very tricky and it's situational and it's dependent on what kind of modifiers we have going on. Like if there's healing death burst, then it can be a little tricky, but to damage all of the enemies at once gives it a really, really nice effect, and the sound is pretty cool. So I'm usually recording these videos during while I'm listening to music or a podcast or something, but I was actually in a call after the podcast while I was recording this, so I was able to get that juicy, explosive gameplay sound effect where whenever it explodes while attacking an enemy, it's just the most satisfying thing, and I cannot not share that with you guys because it is a very, very fun weapon to use when that happens. So yeah, it's kind of tricky, but let's get into what I consider to be the best perks. Now, what I consider to be is mathematically, so I generally try to recommend the highest DPS, and that very simply would be something we'll talk about in a second. So let's start with the 6 perk. Now, the crit hits I already discussed is definitely probably what you're going to want to go for. It's definitely why you're here, but the Affliction or Slow Ensnared is good too. If you do have a copy with Affliction or Slow Ensnared and you just want to make the Stormblade work, then you're going to want to match that 5th perk to those 6 perks, obviously. But if you have any other 6 perk, like the shield for some reason, goodness gracious, or the crit hits, then damage to missiles and bosses is certainly what you're going to want to do because most enemies are going to die in 1 or 2 hits anyway with a typical Paleoluna build, or even any other build for that matter. They're probably going to die without much fuss, so the mist monsters and bosses are certainly where you're going to want to perk this weapon. And attack speed is definitely recommended. So that is definitely what the optimal damage output would be. Double attack speed with Paleoluna is really, really good. And because I've mentioned her multiple times, I'd have to kind of hone in on this. I actually used a hero recruitment voucher for you guys because I wanted to go ahead and supercharge Paleoluna to the max, but I didn't want that to be, skewing my view of these weapons and ruining gameplay. So I am specifically using my 130 copy just to give you guys a balanced review. And this is the typical loadout I go with. Anatomy lessons just to up that crit chance. With her available, you might have noticed we have a 50.5% chance to crit with this weapon, meaning more than half of my hits with the Stormblade are causing that crit explosion. And then, of course, if you're going to be running crits, you might as well get Corrosive Strikes in there so that they can tick away with Affliction after we get that crit, which is really, really nice to have. And Paleoluna is just upping your damage based on how much health you have, and the faster you swing, the more you can activate her ability, and that is why double attack speed would be the best way to go. But, as I said, this is more of a fun weapon while also being quite competitive because you can see the DPS is 72,000. I rarely look at that number seriously, but the Ravager is 64,000. You might note that is less than 72. The Spectroblade is, well, 84,000, but this is a triple attack speed build, and the crit damage comes in on both cases, so it's not exactly apples to apples, but the stab's worth 95k. Well, I mean, that's kind of a lot more than 72, but that's because, again, we have double attack speed on this. You can actually see, I'll spend the reperk just for the video, the DPS goes up quite significantly to 88,000. So it would be better with this double attack speed build, but like I keep mentioning, I'm going to definitely want this thing to be causing explosions while I'm attacking things. Now, you might have noticed we're not running a crit damage perk on this because we're running the crits for the explosions, and you're not going to really be able to utilize that crit damage perk because while you definitely want to see 50.5% paired with a whole heck of a lot of crit damage, you will not be swinging fast enough for that to be worth it. As long as you're using Paleo Luna or even like Assassin Sarah, for example, you are certainly going to want that attack speed to be as high as possible, or else it's just not going to be nearly as strong of a weapon. As for the damage perk, that is where we have a lot less to talk about. Every other perk is inferior damage-wise, obviously, because it's a damage perk, but you could go away with this if you want to. I mean, if you want movement speed or you feel like you need life leech or something, there's nothing to say that you shouldn't. Armor could be quite nice because it'll keep your health higher up while you're using Luna, but I keep my health higher by killing the enemies more deader, so I think damage is probably just the best all-around way to go here. And then the element is kind of a tricky situation. It really depends on what you're feeling. I think all of us are going to agree that energy is kind of just the only way to go on this weapon, so I can't really recommend any other way to do it. But that just about wraps it up for the Stormblade. I don't have much else to say. As exciting and cool of a weapon as it is, there's not much to talk about. I do want to cover all of the other weapons in the game, all of the other melees for that matter, that have that crit explosion, because it makes a lot of really random weapons really, really cool, and to be able to explode the enemies while you're attacking gives some of the melee weapons some much needed area of effect damage, because the ranged weapons kind of have a monopoly on this game because you can eliminate enemies from essentially any distance, and that makes you very, very effective. In fact, if you've ever played with somebody who's really good with an AR or accurate or whatever, you'll notice as the melee player that they'll often eliminate the enemies before you can actually attack them. But with that explosion, you can go straight into an encampment, for example, and just blow up everything all at once. So if I was ever going to recommend the perfect scenario to use the Stormblade and a loadout like I've shown today, I would bring this into an encampment and just try to have a fun time. And that also reminds me, actually, I'm going to give a bonus perk at the end of this video because I'm sure someone's already commented on it. Double crit damage would work really well for this build if you're using Totally Rockin' Out, because that would be the best of both worlds. You could get rid of this attack speed perk because you'd get it from Totally Rockin' Out. You'd have double crit damage, so you'd be doing tons of damage, and you're probably going to want to pair Whiteout Fiona with it so that she can actually activate it. And on top of all that, Totally Rockin' Out will up your crit rating by a ton. It'll up your attack speed. You'll get that crit damage bonus. That would be the best way damage-wise, but I rarely recommend it because Blast from the Past is a much more well-rounded perk. It'll keep you alive during the fight. It'll be a lot less of a glass cannon loadout, and it's going to be significantly more consistent. But if you're somebody who wants to achieve the absolute maximum damage, then yes, Totally Rockin' Out would probably be the way to go. If you guys want to support the channel, feel free to use code Mista at your checkout. Follow my streams in the description below. My streams are awesome. I'd be happy to see you there. You can become a channel member too with the link in the description below and the join button on the channel, and you can use those emotes down in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a nice day. And then